God, why have you allowed the bad things to happen to me? And there are people that have done me wrong and they're not suffering. And God, it's not fair. If God was fair, we'd all be in hell right now. If God gave me what I deserved, if God gave you what you deserve, do you really want what you deserve before God? I don't. See, the question we have to ask, do we really want God to be fair? Is that what we want? Do you want a relationship where God gives you what you deserve? I mentioned earlier, our kids would argue, they picked up, it's not fair, and they would argue, they would let us know. And it's interesting, they would always know when they felt it wasn't fair when they were at the losing side, so let's say if we have them do dishes and one night it was like we grilled and there weren't many dishes, and the next night, Sandy cooked a big meal and they got, whoever's doing dishes has all these pot and pans. They'd come back, it's not fair, yesterday they got to clean and it was a small thing and it's not fair, or they got a bigger gift or they got a bigger piece than I did. It's not fair. And we've all heard that, right? It's amazing that my kids never come back on the other side and say, it's not fair. Last night they had big dishes to clean and tonight I just have a few. It's not fair. I got a bigger present than they did. They never talk about that. It's just always only when we see ourselves as the losing end. And is that true in our relationship with God? I think about even as a parent, one interaction I had with one of my kids, and seldom do you have a time where you win an argument with your child, and this was one of those times. My kids was arguing, one was arguing something was fair, and I gave her the usual response, well, life isn't fair, too bad. And she turned to me and said, thank you for the wisdom, Dad. I really needed to know. She didn't really say it. They hated when I said that, but life isn't fair. But then you could tell that she got this counter argument. She had this thought in her head and she just got this smile. And she said, yes, I know that life isn't fair, but God is fair. And if you want to be like God, then you've got to be fair. And she's like, okay, I got you over the barrel. You're a pastor and you want to be modeling God here. And so how are you going to answer that? It's kind of like that. She just knew she had me. And that was one of those cases where you just sensed that, okay, God gave me the right answer. And so I looked at her and I said, you know what? God isn't fair. And I'm thankful for that. Because if God was fair, we'd all be in hell right now. If God gave me what I deserved, if God gave you what you deserve, do you really want what you deserve before God? I don't. God isn't fair. God relates to us in grace. And she sat there and thought of trying to argue and then just turned and walked away. I don't think she ever said life isn't fair again. I mean, it's kind of like that was a flat-out win. And the fact is that the Bible is clear that God isn't fair. Our relationship with God isn't based on fairness. And I'm thankful. We should all be thankful for that. Because if we got what we deserve, what's the Bible say? Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. What I earn, what we all deserve because we're sinners is death, is God's punishment. That's what I deserve, is eternity in hell. And anything more than death and separation from God in hell is only by God's grace and mercy. What we deserve is God's punishment. The wages of sin is death. But according to the Bible, what Jesus came and lived the perfect life, and he earned God's reward. And yet, instead of taking that, he took our sin and he took our death, and on faith, he gives us his righteousness. He took what we deserve and he gives us what he deserved. And when we understand that as a follower of Christ, well, we're going to stop talking about what we deserve, because we're going to realize that I don't want a relationship with God that's all about what I deserve and here's how I perform. I want, in a sense, going back to the parable, I want the relationship with the other guys that were hired. And it wasn't a contract. It was just say, trust me. Go out and work and trust me. I'll take care of you at the end. See, the parable is all about the context. That's the key. And the context is in response to this young rich ruler that basically is coming and saying, it's a contractual relationship with God. What must I do? How do I earn God's blessings? And God's like, no, you're all wrong. And then it's Peter who comes back and says, well, I know I'm forgiven by grace, but yet this is what I've done. And what do I get because of what I've done? I'm mixing performance and grace. And he says, no, you don't want a contractual relationship. If you do, he ends the parable of verse 16, the last will be first and the first will be last. If you think that you want to be first and you're trying to earn your way into reward, you're going to end up last. And it's people that are last and that are just trusting that God's going to take care of them, they're the ones that are going to discover what's true, that's, what it means to live in God's blessing. See, I think a ton of our spiritual problems and our spiritual unrest comes from having this contractual relationship with God mentality, that we believe at the end of the day that God owes us something, and we're frustrated because God isn't delivering. And even as believers, we can mix our performance in with God's grace. And we all struggle with this. Even at the end of the service today, I was talking with somebody, and she said, man, I'm struggling with that. And she was just saying, yeah, I just realized, there are people that are bad things that happen. God, why have you allowed the bad things to happen to me? And there are people that have done me wrong, and they're not suffering. And God, it's not fair. And she's struggling. We all struggle with this. So what are some signs that we're struggling with it? What are some indications, some hints that this could be something that's hiding in our heart? And with each one, I'm going to give you 3 signs, and with each one, I'm also going to give you a question. And this is kind of like a self-evaluation question to ask yourself to see that if, at least in part, this might be an issue. Number 1, sign or symptom that we're relating to God, at least in part contractually, is a spirit of bitterness. We see this here in the parable. You have these workers, they worked all day, and suddenly they're really bitter because these other guys are getting more, as much as I am, that I deserve more. Here's the question we have to ask ourselves. Am I bitter because I feel that God has withheld some blessing from me that I think that I deserve? How do you answer that question in your heart? See, what Jesus is getting at is, I deserve better. Really? Do you want what you deserve? Because the fact is, everything that we have apart from hell is God's grace. And a lot of times we may look at that and from our perspective, but God, I'm serving you and I'm trying to do what's right. And why are bad things happening? We assume that we deserve his blessings. And we feel that God has wronged us in some way if bad things happen. There's a passage where Jesus speaks about this in Luke chapter 13. It's kind of this really unusual story where, there's apparently a tower that had collapsed and killed 18 people. And it was news around that day, and some people come and ask Jesus, and they're basically asking, were those 18 people bad? Were they more wicked than everyone else that they were all killed at the same time? And Jesus' answer is basically, no. And then he gives one of the most politically incorrect statements in the Bible. He says, no, I tell you, unless you repent, you all likewise will perish. And basically what he's saying, you're asking why the tower fell on those 18 people. The question you ought to be asking is, why didn't the tower fall on you? The fact of the matter is that all of us, if the tower fell on me, that's what I deserve. If everything fell apart in my life, I couldn't complain at all. And the fact of the matter is that what we tend to do is that we tend to say when something bad happens, God, why did you allow that bad thing to happen? How often do we say, God, why is the tower not falling on me today? Why did you give me breath? Why do you give me life? Why do you give me family? Why do you give me relationships? Why do I have a job? Why do I have all these things that I don't deserve? They're all a gift of God's grace. I think that God gave me an event that helped me maybe have a unique perspective on this. When I was 19, I was involved in a very bad accident that almost killed me. It came that close away from killing me. And I know that. And I could have looked at that time and said, God, why did you allow that accident to happen? And what I felt God was teaching me is I realized I came that far away from dying. And one of the questions I had to ask, why did God let me live? Why did God give me life when he could have taken me like that? I should have died 40 years ago. And then now I look at life and I'm saying, everything, every day that I've had, every relationship that I've had in those 40 years since, I don't deserve any of those. Everyone is a gift of God. And if everything was taken away tomorrow, man, I am amazingly blessed by his grace. All these things that I didn't deserve. And if I remember that, it helps protect me from the bitterness that I can feel when things don't go well. So that's one sign. A second sign and symptom of having this relation to God that, at least in part in contractual terms, is that we can have jealousy or resentment. And those two are actually two sides of the same coin. So jealousy is when I'm mad that I don't have something. Resentment is when I'm mad that somebody else has something that I don't have. And so there are two sides. And the question we have to ask ourselves in self-evaluation is, am I jealous of good things that other people have and that I want? Or do I resent others for the blessings that they have? And we have to ask that. And what you see here in the story is these workers, these worked all day. Well, they're jealous. How they got paid more. I'm resentful because I deserved more. And the fact of the matter is, how many times have we basically said, why did they get that? Why, they're not obeying God. Why are they prospering? God, why are you letting bad things happen to me? God, why are they able to have kids so quickly and we're trying to obey you and you're not letting us do that? Why am I the ones that have health problems and, they seem to have everything going right for them? God, why did they get the job? I deserve better. God, I'm doing things right. And we may not say that out loud, but it's what we are thinking. And what we need to remember is that, again, everything that we have is a gift of God. Every good thing that we have, and God promises that he's going to take care of us. And there are times that we don't always understand, but we've got to look at it and say, man, I've got to work against that jealousy. I've got to, instead of seeing what I don't have, I've got to remember what I do have. The third sign or symptom of where we can do this in relationship to God is probably the most common, and that's when we feel anger at God. And it's probably the most common symptom of how we relate to God in contractual terms. And that being said, I know that there are people here today that you have, deep down, you have anger at God. And why is that? The question that we have to ask ourselves is, do I get angry when God doesn't answer my prayer in the way that I think he should? And there are many of us that we have that experience. It's like, God, I pray with a spirit of anticipation. The expectation basically saying, okay, God, I'm trying to follow you. I'm trying to do this. Here's my need. And deep down, I expect you to answer, to do what I want you to do. And if you don't, I start arguing. But God, I've gone to church and I've obeyed the rules and I'm doing what's right and I've tied my money. God, I have problems with my kids. God, I brought them to church and I've tried to do what's right. I've tried to be a good spouse. I've tried to obey you in the things that I'm doing. And God, now I have this need and I'm praying to you and you're not answering. Meaning you aren't doing what I expect you to do. And after all I've done for you, how can you let me down and not do what you're supposed to do for me? Now you see, that's a contractual attitude. It's basically saying, God, I've done, and so therefore I expect. You've got to deliver. And here we need to remember that God doesn't give us what we deserve, and we should be thankful for that. And God is gracious and gives us incredibly good things, but it doesn't mean that he gives us all the things that we think we need. And the fact is that, okay, he's by grace, and even in that grace, we still come to him as a parent, and he does bless us. But also when we come to him as a parent, we realize that at times he's going to allow difficult things. He's going to allow us to be disappointed. But even in that, there's a purpose. It's not because we failed him in some way. It's not that he's somehow judging us, which is saying in Romans 8, there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. No, he doesn't condemn us. He doesn't punish us for those who are believers. So then when we come to him, why are we asking? So part of it is we're asking sometimes with the wrong basis. We're coming and we're saying, God, I've obeyed you. I've done this. I've performed. And we're asking based on contract. And God says, no, it's all about grace. It's not based on here's what I've done. It's God, I don't deserve. Here's my need, and I'm coming to you as a father, and I'm asking you in grace. But part of that asking is that I not only trust that you're good and that you're loving, but also that you're knowledgeable and that you know things that I don't know and that you might have a plan in my life that I don't understand. And part of that is that, God, you may even allow sometimes disappointment and pain because that's part of the process of you working for a good purpose. Because it says later in Romans 8, we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his good purpose. Do I really believe that?